Hey everybody, how are you? This is Zeki Hamid. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at KUOW, and welcome to the 13th episode of Are We Going to Be Okay? Now, if you haven't joined us before, this series really started out as a way to give community members a virtual place to come together and feel like a community again because of COVID-19 and because of our inability to gather in person. Now, at the same time, we wanted to check in with communities and industries that make up our region to see how we're doing and to get tips and tactics on getting through this pandemic together. But obviously, the title of this series, Are We Going to Be Okay, has taken a really different meaning over the past couple of months because of the protests against police violence and for racial justice. And of course, I just really want to acknowledge that our hearts and thoughts are with Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and our hearts and thoughts are also with his family. So this show has really covered a whole lot of things, but at the heart of it, it's always been about checking in with our own folks, with our own community to see how we're doing as a collective. So this one today is our back to school special, pandemic style. So now let me introduce a few people for you. First, I want to introduce my co-host for the series, Special Projects Editor and co-host of Battle Tactics for Your Sexist Workplace, Jeannie Yandel. Hey, Jeannie, how you doing?
Hi, Zaki. I have my KUOW Right to Bear Knowledge mug today, which seems appropriate given that this is the education episode.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. And of course, during this episode, we will talk about how traditional in-person classrooms had to change rapidly during the pandemic. But we're also going to talk about the role teachers and students play in molding the future of equitable education. Since the beginning of the show, we've tried to provide different tactics and strategies for navigating what it's like to live through a pandemic in a way that is sustainable and healthy physically, mentally, emotionally. And we will do some of that today too, but we're also thinking about how to leave the hour with ways to think about what education is for and how we can all reimagine it better. And we're hoping that you will be part of this conversation too. So please send us your comments and questions on whatever platform you're watching. Just go to the comment section below. You can send us your questions there, or you can text the word okay, just those letters okay, to 206-926-9955.
Awesome. So let me introduce our guests now. Our first guest, Shraddha Shirude, is a math teacher at Garfield High School in Seattle and the Secretary Director of Washington Ethnic Studies Now, a nonprofit that is committed to bringing ethnic studies to every K-12 classroom in Washington State, taught by anti-racist educators committed to centering the history and lived experiences of the BIPOC communities. We also have Lila Shroff, who's currently on a gap year in South Korea. It's 5:30 or close, I guess 6 a.m. right now in South Korea. Before starting, she's taken a gap year before starting at Stanford University next fall. She's a lifelong storyteller and has a background in audio journalism. She was previously part of the radioactive program that we have here at KUOW, which is a journalistic training program for youth. And she's also deeply interested in the intersection of media, business, politics, and data. Welcome to you both. I have a really quick thing just before we get going. It's a little bit of a plug here. We're looking to hear from middle and high school students with short personal stories that illustrate what it's like to start a new school year remotely during a pandemic. So if you are in middle school or high school or know of people that would like to be part of that story, just email our reporter Joshua McNichols at jmcnichols@kuow.org. We're going to put his info in the comment section. That's all I wanted to say. There you go. Back to you, Jeannie.
Nicely done, Zeki. And I just want to echo Zeki's thanks. I mean, there is so much going on right now. So, the run up to the school year, Shraddha. So thank you for joining us. And Lila, it is 6 a.m. I would choose to be asleep at this time if I were you. So thank you both for taking this hour with us. And I want to start by sort of going back in time a little to March 11th, when Seattle Public Schools announced their complete closure for, at the time, it was just 2 weeks. Wow. Following an announcement from Governor Jay Inslee. And Shraddha, I want to start with you. What do you remember thinking about that closure?
was a very interesting experience, to say the least. As a teacher, I remember my kind of thinking leading up to that moment was, when are they going to call it already? We know that they need to, like, we know that we need to go home. Are they going to do it? When is it going to happen? And in the meantime, I see my kids panicking, like they're putting on the mask, they're putting on the gloves, they're sanitizing their hands 16 times in a class period, like, scared, just panic, almost comical panic, because it was an experience we've never like had before. And all you've ever seen this kind of panic is on TV in these movies about pandemics, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole time, as the teacher, I'm feeling super anxious and stressed, but have to be the calm and have to be, we didn't know a lot about it. And at the time it was like only older people. So it's like, hey, you know what, we're going to be fine. I've always had a sanitation station in my classroom since I started teaching. I've never gotten sick since, because my students are required to put sanitizer on their hands whenever they come in. Been that way since I started teaching. And so like those physical things didn't change, but the atmosphere really did. And it was just constant panic. And teachers trying to get kids to think about whatever their subject matter was when they were panicking about their lives. I actually we didn't find out that we were leaving until 30 minutes before, or maybe an hour before we were going to be leaving for 2 weeks. And I found out because a student told me, like, they came into my classroom during lunch and told me, school's out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Wow. That's how I found out.
Oh my God.
Because I had my prep in the morning, and the email was sent in the middle of the day. So I didn't have a chance to check my email because I'd been teaching. And so then during lunchtime, I go over and I check my email and I'm like, oh, all right. So I guess school's out in 30 minutes now.
Wow. Okay, well, I know the answer to this next question then, but I'm going to ask you anyway. How prepared did you feel moving towards remote education last year?
Right, exactly that. It was, I remember asking my colleagues, I was like, so, when we're coming back? And they were like, maybe make sure you bring your computer. Maybe don't leave any valuables here. Like, that was about how prepared we were. And we didn't know if we were going to be allowed in the building. We were like, wait, what do you mean now I have to figure out how to teach online? It wasn't so hard, for me just to navigate some of the basics, like how do you do a Zoom call and how do you create how do you put assignments on Schoology? Because of my age, right? I'm a millennial. I grew up with learning technology, like fast growing technology. So that adaptation was a lot easier for me. But I've got colleagues, who are in their 60s and 50s, and even some people in their 30s who are like, what is Schoology again? It's because we don't get that kind of training. And so then when the expectation was that we would just adapt, it wasn't fair. Because that training's always been there, but it's like over here. Right. It's not a primary need when we're in the classroom. It's like, hopefully you'll get around to this.
So what kind of like resources were available to you at the time? Did they provide you with a bunch of resources that you could take advantage of?
I think that was why they gave us those 2 weeks, is they were gathering them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because I know a lot of people were like upset, like, you're just throwing our kids on us. It's like, well, a lot of us are parents too. And this is a pandemic. Let's not forget that in a pandemic, our school's really what's critical right now.
Right. Is there something that you wish you would have had?
So many things. Fast internet would have been great. I had to upgrade my internet later because my partner also works as a teacher in Seattle Public Schools. And he and I were having our classes at the same time, so then the calls would drop. I think the biggest thing that I really wanted was contact information for all of my families that I knew would get me connected to them. Because that's what was breaking my heart, was not having contact info that was, like my students' cell phone numbers, right? I have parents but they work. Maybe they don't speak English. Maybe they have 6 different children and they don't actually remember me because I'm probably the 12th teacher that's called them. You know, whatever the situation is, parents were being bombarded with information and support that, especially at the secondary level, they never get. And so I wish that I had had time and space to just actually connect with my families.
Right.
And not being asked to teach. Kind of like what we're asking as a union, the districts to allow us to do now.
Right.
Give us time to just connect to our families. Because we have to put humans first.
That's, I can imagine, God, how tough that is. Lila, I want to kind of turn to you for a bit because there's something that's really obviously related to what we're talking about. But before I do want to ask you about your experience in South Korea, because you got to South Korea and you had to quarantine in a government facility for what, 2 weeks?
Yeah, 14 days.
14. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Days. It sounds a bit intimidating, government facility, but in reality, it's a nice hotel room. And, you know, just the second I got off the plane, before I got off the plane, on the plane, the differences were already clear, right? Temperature checks. And getting here, the immigration process was station after station after station. And I was traveling with a friend that speaks Korean, which was really helpful and could help me navigate through. And as soon as we got to the quarantine facility, COVID tests and people in hazmat suits. And since then I've been in this hotel room. But it's been quite the experience to see sort of the transparency and just how the government's operating differently. I know before we started this conversation, I was talking about how I've received 60 plus notifications from the Korean government in the past 10 days about the current status of what's happening outside my hotel room. And then there's also just been great communication within the hotel. There's an internal intercom system. So they'll say 7 or 8 times a day, they'll make an announcement of your food's delivered, please enjoy your meal, or there's a typhoon coming, the weather's bad outside, shut your windows, and you don't know what's gonna come next. But
wow, that's pretty intense. So I guess now, you know, to kind of go back to, you know, talking about the experiences when this first happened, as you know, as teachers were experimenting with various teaching techniques, students were also adapting to new learning methods. So tell us about the transition from sitting in classes for 6 hours a day to learning, to learning online. What did that look like for you?
Sure. So I was a second semester senior, which I think made things a little difficult already. There was a lot of people sort of starting to tune out. And classes, right, March 11th or 12th was the last day of school. And there was sort of, for me, this weird month hiatus where there weren't any classes that were happening. We just had optional work. And if you're thinking about second semester seniors doing optional work, let me tell you, there's not a lot of people that are signing up for that. And so there was about a month of you can read this book, you can do this if you want to get ahead for when we start in class, but not much going on. Which I think, there was that time that was needed to sort of adapt to the situation. But then at a point it was like, okay, now what? What are we doing? Are we in school? Are we not in school? A lot of confusion. And when classes did restart, I think you could sort of feel the effects of that time off. And it was like this, sort of like summer break, but then all of a sudden I'm learning and I don't really know what the expectations are. I think one of the hard things about adapting to this online format was just the original schedule I had was these 2-hour class blocks. And, 2 hours on a Zoom call is really tiring. And then 2 hours on a Zoom call twice a day. And you're just sort of done by the end of the day, but you haven't had as much time in learning and instruction. And so I think we were figuring it out as the teachers are figuring it out too, though. So, after the first few weeks, classes were getting adjusted. And by the end of the semester, I was feeling a little bit more like, okay, maybe this is something I feel comfortable doing. And I know how this works now.
Did you talk to students that were kind of checking out? Because I'm wondering how many people were actually signing in when they were supposed to.
Yeah, so that was something I actually felt was difficult as a student. Was we'd have these class discussions, right? And I'd want to turn on my camera and be engaged and be talking, but then if everybody else's camera is turned off, you don't want to be the one student sitting there with your camera turned on, awkwardly like answering the questions, right? So that was one thing. And so it was really the vibe of the class would be set from that first moment. If everybody came on, the cameras were off, and nobody was answering questions, there was sort of this like feedback of nobody else would. But if the teacher was saying, hey, we're going to do a discussion, we'd love to see your faces, let's do a personal check-in, like what TV show have you been watching in quarantine? All of a sudden there was this more personal element, and you felt like, okay, this is a little bit more like a classroom. I feel like I'm really here. But there were definitely classes where you notice, like, I haven't seen, so-and-so in a few weeks, like what's going on. I see them maybe on Snapchat or Instagram, but all of a sudden they disappeared from class.
Yeah. And do I have this right? Did you take a class with about 10,000 people online?
It started with 10,000 people. I think it might have dwindled a little bit, but yeah, I did a intro to programming class. It had 80,000 people start the application, and they said, okay, we can't have that many people in the class. But there were about 800 sections of groups of 10. So you would do this lecture 3 times a day or 3 times a week. And then you would have your section that was live, and there'd be me sitting, on Mercer Island, and there'd be a guy at 3 a.m. or whatever time it was from Nigeria, and a working mom from Texas, all together. And that was an extraordinary educational experience online.
It's amazing.
I mean, that sort of feels like the promise of, the situation we're in and what this could look like. I wonder though, Shraddha, we just heard Lila kind of talk about seniors, second semester seniors, like opting in or opting out of, joining the class, doing work. How did you have to modify your own expectations of your students? You're laughing. I'm glad we have a screen that you laugh at.
Modify expectations. That was interesting. Expectations are an interesting way to approach it. Something I have learned, especially over the last 6 months or so, is that teachers love setting higher expectations for students than they set for themselves. And the way I approached my class, like my classes, I should say, is if I'm not willing to do this, then I can't ask my students to do it too. So one thing I do when I'm lesson planning, which is a very common practice in teaching, is if it takes me 10 minutes to do it, then I'm going to plan to have 30 minutes or 50 minutes or something like that, right, for the students to be able to do it. And so I approached it similarly, is if I'm tired after a half an hour of being on a Zoom call, I'm going to assume my students are going to be tired after 10 minutes on a Zoom call, right? So if I can't listen to a lecture for more than 30 minutes, my students shouldn't be expected to listen to more than a 10-minute lecture. So I need to change what I'm doing because it's not working for me. I can't imagine it's working for them. And, I don't like having more than one Zoom call in a day, then I need to change what I'm doing. And so I don't think it was about lowering or hiring expectations for my students, but for me, it was literally about shifting them based on what I was experiencing too, because it was one of those things that it's a really funny thing I've noticed with teachers, right? I said it earlier, but like we're terrible students. Like during our staff meetings, like we're in, we have staff meetings and the chat is all filled with memes and GIFs and people calling each other. Like we're so goofy. And like in our staff meeting today, one of the teachers got up and was like, all right, you guys, so we're going to get started. I made you guys a TikTok. We're going to dance to WAP. The whole chat just blew up for like 2 minutes. And we do that kind of fun stuff as a staff, so we should also be doing that kind of fun stuff with our kids. It's what brings us joy, so why wouldn't we do that with our students too? Like, we have to do the things that bring them joy. So I had class once a week, and then I had office hours. Do you want to talk more about it? Come by, let's talk more. And oh, you can't make it to class? That's fine. I made this video. You can watch it. Can't make a video longer than 2 to 3 minutes. Why? Because I wouldn't watch it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Lila, how about did you have to kind of modify expectations for yourself?
I think because the modified expectations coming from the teacher standpoint were a bit different, what I was expecting myself to contribute was also different. But I also it gave me the opportunity to do other things and explore areas I was interested in, right? Like this huge class that I normally would have said, oh, I'm really stressed out by school, I have so many assignments. I had this sort of free time that I could invest exploring other things I was interested in. In terms of classwork, I think there was also, and maybe this will change headed into the fall, but it was sort of the A or 60% A or fail, or however the grading system was set up. And so I think for a lot of people, that was sort of a signal of like, okay, do the bare minimum and see how far you can get on that. And I think given the circumstances, it made sense to be really flexible. But I think there was also sort of this like double-edged sword of how to be accommodating, but also keep students engaged and encouraged. And I think it also, though, opened up the freedom of like, okay, you don't have to be doing everything just for the sake of the grade. Like, let's have these really cool discussions. I had a government class, and we were opening up conversations about, that weren't necessarily fitting into our curriculum. One thing that was interesting was sort of navigating the AP testing, standardized testing, sort of storm of, every week there was different things happening, and how do you prepare for this? And what's the expectation for yourself as a student when you don't know what the test looks like and you haven't been in class learning the material? And so I think having just sort of a realistic, mindset of like, it's okay if everything's not going perfectly. There is all these things going on. So I think being realistic and just really adapting to the situation.
So people can ask questions if you want to just put them in the comments below, or text OK to 206-926-9955. And I do have a couple of questions that came in, and they actually have to do with the same thing. So we'll ask that one question that deals with this, which is, and I guess Shraddha, you could probably talk to this. How do you feel about having the support to meet the needs of your students with disabilities? What kind of support is there? I've also heard from somebody that emailed me, said that the district kind of had very little time to kind of put things together for students with disabilities for this upcoming semester. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I've got some opinions about that. Oh my gosh. I will say I have not had a chance to look at the tentative agreement that's been reached in my district from Seattle Public Schools and Seattle Education Association, which is our educators union. And we did have some educators, specifically special education educators, on there during bargaining. However, I have to say, the fact that special education educators and our educators union has to bargain with our district for the special education rights of our students is outrageous. Special education should not be bargained on. We should not have to fight for reaching the basic needs for our special education students to be successful. That should be the goal for everybody. I don't know why that needed to be fought on, and why special education teachers needed to say, no, you're not hearing what we're saying, and why families who have students that have special needs are having to fight for simply just getting their minutes. It's an outrageous conversation at all. what the conversation shouldn't be is, should they get it? Or, you know, oh, we need to figure out which things they should get. The conversation needs to be, this is what they need. And here are all of the different ways we can reach that need. Which ones for you, families, students, educators, work best? That's the conversation we need to be having. But that's really a mind shift change on the part of not just the district, but also the system. And really prioritizing the students' needs and not prioritizing the corporate hedge funds who support the district by giving them this, you know, like, oh, thank you to, you know, Amazon for giving us Chromebooks. Now we owe you something in a contract, or thank you, Microsoft, for providing us this and this, you know, free training, or I don't know what they're, I don't work for the district, but it feels like what we are prioritizing is laws that need to be changed and our relationships with corporations. And those are not the things that public education or education period need to be prioritizing. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I feel like that answer gives a little bit of a of insight into how you might think about this next question. And I'm curious to hear from both of you on this. You know, what do you think this could be part of, you know, reimagining at least what the coming months will look like? If you could tell the school district what to prioritize for this sort of new uncharted territory of all remote education, what should they be doing? How should they be adjusting expectations for students? Lila, let's start with you.
I think one of the things that excites me most are all these really creative opportunities. And I think, you know, we're sort of, a lot of us are thinking about school online being sort of the same and just the digital version. I think it can look really different in a lot of really cool ways. So one thing that's been on my mind is, you know, you could have a classroom where you're partnered right now, your classroom in Seattle, and you bring in, you know, the classroom in South Korea, and now you're doing your history lesson together. Or like, why does that even have to be international? You think about, there's so much, you know, rifts within our country. Why isn't this classroom in Seattle and a classroom in Georgia learning history together? So like sort of partnerships like that. I think there's a ton of things happening in the world that students need a place to process and that are really have educational value, and that students don't necessarily have a guaranteed safe space to be discussing some of these topics, and it's a perfect way to learn. So bringing in these current themes. And I think whether you're talking about math or science or history, like every single subject that it fits with what's going on, there's so much going on, it fits. So I think really digging into the creative ways that we can use these virtual platforms and not being limited by how do we make everything be like how it was, and how do we, you know, like keep everything from before. I think exploring the new ways to use beyond just, you know, oh, here's this cool whiteboard thing, or like, I think thinking bigger picture. And I think as, you know, teachers in schools start thinking about education like that, there's students will be more engaged naturally. And I think there's ways that expectations will just shift positively, right? I don't think the bar needs to be dropped or the standard should be lower by any means. I think students should, you know, still have to be doing the work, but that doesn't mean it has to be painful. I think what's painful is keeping the expectations of, you know, you're doing instruction for 6 hours a day, and that's not, you know, viable over Zoom, but you can still be doing projects, having discussions and learning for the same amount, or learning more actually. And I think we need to be less afraid to start doing things that are sort of radically different than what have been done in the physical classroom.
Yeah, I love that. Shraddha, what do you think?
You're representing my whole philosophy in that. It's your students know what they want. The youth know. We don't need to be over here being like, oh, let me think of this way or that way, or what about this and what about this? The problem is that we're over here as adults being like, I know what's best for kids. No, we don't. They know what they need, what they want. I never would have thought of that idea. And now that's brilliant, right? And it's coming from Lila, your lived experience, right? That's something you experience, and that's something that you offer to an educator that they could never come up with on their own. And I fully believe, even still today, that the opportunity has not yet been squandered for true radical change. The education system has been broken since its conception. It's not that it's ever been broken, it's working exactly as it intended, right? Its goal was always to uplift certain people and to oppress other people and to completely erase others, right? And I do a lot of work in racial equity, which intersects deeply with I forgot sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. But all that to be said, yeah. All that to be said, I, as an educator, plan to make a lot of big changes. So even with the system crushing me, telling me that we're gonna have 6 hours of school or whatever they end up coming up with to basically replicate, I plan to change how I teach in my classroom, and I really hope that other educators will do the same. One big change is that I'm eliminating tests. I've never liked giving them. They've never done anything for me, never do anything for students. And I think it's really unacceptable that any teacher or any principal or any school district would expect not just a teacher, but a child to turn on their camera, sit and take a test, and have someone come into their home as a guest and essentially invade their privacy and home and say, this is what you will do during this time, and I'm proctoring a test for you within your own home. Is that really how you want to engage with that child? Even when they're 18, they're still a child. That's how you want to engage your time with them? That's how you want to assess them during all of this amazing opportunity for students to really show what they care about, share their passions, show how much they've learned. You're going to say you're behind if you don't pass this test. It completely negates all of the beautiful learning that is happening. You see the youth creating these things, and the children, the activists that are formed saying, this isn't right. Let me tell you what is right. Here's what could be better. I'm solving your problems for you. And the teachers are over here saying, be quiet, take your test.
That could be quite revolutionary. Just seriously getting rid of testing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm a math teacher, by the way. I'm a math teacher.
I feel like we have a question from an audience member that's kind of related to this, from Jamie on YouTube, and they write, what is a reasonable amount of time to ask students to devote to online learning per week?
Lila, I think you had something to say earlier, and I'll let you answer first.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No. I was going to say another thing too was, navigating these assessments last semester in this virtual format. Already tests are often about okay, I'll memorize for the test and then I'll forget and see how I can just get through school like that. And then you have people okay, how can I look stuff up online, and all this people trying to preserve any sense of academic integrity and have an effective assessment. It wasn't working. And so any tests we did have were a matter of how savvy, Google savvy people were, which is pretty useless in terms of learning. And so I think the shift to project-based learning and student leadership and discussions is really exciting. And I'll just give an anecdote. I had a friend who's been pretty involved in a lot of protests on the ground, and you can see on her Snapchat story, she's doing her calculus homework at a protest and trying to navigate balancing online school and being involved with what she feels is her priorities. So I think it was just really interesting to see that play out. Back to the question. That's a difficult question, right? I think it's unreasonable to expect students to be on Zoom calls and staring at screens for the same amount of time students would be in class, right? Because it's just, you don't feel healthy and you don't feel good looking at screens and just interacting like that for so long every day, whether you're working, whether you're a student, whoever you are. But that doesn't mean that I think that time necessarily always has to be online. I think there is room to say, one of my favorite things that I had teachers do would say, we have a 2-hour period for our class. We're going to do half an hour at the beginning. Then I'm going to give you this assignment or this project or this research to do for the next hour. And then we'll check back in the last half hour. And so there's an expectation that you're engaged and you're doing stuff, but you're not like, I'm sitting watching my computer for 2 hours straight. And that worked very well.
That's cool.
So I do want to turn to talking about racial equity and anti-racism in education right now. We've gotten a couple of questions already through texting about that, and we had a question about that. So let me see if I can kind of put them together here. So Shraddha, you said that education disparities have always existed, but when students from white families were impacted during the pandemic, that's when the response became immediate and effective. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I can only really speak to my experience, and I can only really reference the stories that my students and the communities that I engage with share with me. But it's so, like, if you actually look at the research and look at the history of public education, some of the first schools in America were boarding schools created to assimilate Native Indigenous peoples so that they would become more white, right? Children were ripped away from their families, their clothing was taken from them, their hair was cut, and they were asked, to dress a certain way and not allowed to speak their native languages. That kind of stuff has not changed. And people want to believe that it has. Native communities have been out there doing this activist work, and I'm not here to speak for them. So I'm going to speak to my experience. I just want to acknowledge that this is where that started. Mm-hmm. My experience growing up was I came to America. I'm an immigrant, moved here when I was about 3.5. So, this is mostly my lived experience, is being an Indian American. And some of the experiences I had growing up were, I went to school and I was asked why I smelled gross, why I smelled like curry, what was that weird sound I was making, which was me speaking Marathi, all these kind of, they're teasings, right, that children do to each other. They tease each other. And they should be taught not to say those things. But the thing is then what happens when whiteness is the center of education and what we teach, we never even bother to teach those other ways of not just living, but knowing. I remember I came home one day and told my mother I didn't want to be Indian anymore. I wanted to be normal. I yelled at her and said, stop giving me this food. I don't want to be a loser anymore. And so being who I am and where I'm from and what I actually am, with my being in my mind was a loser or weird or whatever else, right? Which is exactly what the purpose of American education is, and that is assimilation. And so then we're over here trying to fix this system that's broken, when the reality is it's functioning exactly as it should be. It's assimilating people, it's erasing their identities, it's turning them into a Borg. That's what our job is as public school educators. If we stick to the standards and we stick to the rules and everything that we have to do, is to make sure that every child comes out not as their own unique human being, but another member of the Borg. I'm sorry, I just started watching a lot of Star Trek.
It's a good thing to watch. No, I know exactly kind of what you're talking about, because like I immigrated here, but a lot older than you were when you immigrated here. You said you were 3. I immigrated here when I was 19. And I experienced the same kinds of things, but in a different level, because when I went to community college first, and then to college, and then to grad school, and I got the same jokes all the time, right? Things like, wait a minute, is that ticking I hear in your backpack right now? You know, referring to the terrorist thing, because, you know, Arab equals terrorists, you know, in their minds. You know, and I would go along with it though. I would kind of, you know, make the joke with them and stuff like that because of that need to belong, right? And so it continues past, you know, it goes into colleges, it goes into the workplace. And I'm wondering, Lila, did you experience anything like that?
Sure. So I was born here, but my dad came from India, so I share that Indian American identity. And I think and going to school on Mercer Island, which is a pretty white community as well, there's definitely, you know, times when you're thinking about how you fit in with everybody else in your classroom, and it's definitely very real as a student. I think it's definitely something that's there, and it's something that when you're a third grader, a fourth grader, you don't necessarily have the presence of mind to say, you know, look at the situation and look at the system as a whole and understand what's happening. And, you know, I think for some students, you know, you're able to figure it out by maybe 11th or 12th grade and start saying, hey, like, I see where I belong in this world, and I know that my identity is amazing and what it should be. But then other students, you know, maybe it takes a little longer, or, you know, aren't able to sort of find that comfort in their identity within a school setting. And I think that makes it really hard to, you know, be a student and be learning and happy and engaging and have this sort of like back presence in the back of your mind, questioning things that are going on. So, and then that's where it's so important to have teachers that can understand this. And, you know, from a really young age, when students who are, you know, first, second grade students aren't able to, you know, push back on some of those comments that kids making fun and doing this and that, when you have teachers that are able to be supportive, I think that makes a world of a difference.
Mm-hmm. So we have about, you know, a little less than 20 minutes here, and I know we have a lot of questions that are coming in and a lot of topics that we want to cover. So I think we're kind of move through these a little quickly here because they're so important. So one question that did come in related to racial equity is like, how do you support anti-racist work in schools? What, you know, yeah. So how, especially for somebody who might be new to that.
Lila, would you like to go first, or?
If you can go for it, or I can say a couple words.
It's up to you. I want to give student voice first priority.
I'll say one thing that I really quick that's been on my mind is a lot of times I've seen schools using equity sort of as a buzzword, and it's like, did we check the equity box? And oh great, we checked the equity box, moving on. And that to me always felt wrong, right? It shouldn't be box checking, it's the process, it's not the, you know, getting through this. And so I think putting a lot more effort into the process and thinking about how we're doing things instead of are we doing them.
I could not have said that any better. 100% agree. So much of this, the anti-racism has been around forever. And now that it's popularized, suddenly everyone's got it in their mission statement. It's, let me, you know, like, here's my Twitter profile, I've got anti-racist educator at a Title I school. Like, why is that there? You weren't anti-racist, you were working at a Title I school. What does that mean to you? But now everybody's got it out there. One of the things that really frustrates me is, and I've said it before, I'm gonna say it again, Black trauma should not be inspiring white folks. If you have not understood by now the lived experience of the Black community, where have you been? Stop asking your colleagues to relive their trauma. Stop asking your community, the Black community around you, to tell you the experiences that they're having. Because simply being inspired isn't enough, or crying and saying, I can't believe. Why can't you believe it? This has been happening for years, since literally 1619, this has been happening. And so for you to sit here and tell me 400 plus years later that you can't believe or what can I do? There's this process, I forgot who I learned this phrase from, but a brilliant writer. And it was the consciousness raising. And it's a cycle, right? Where everybody's gonna read books. They're gonna be an anti-racist. Here's how to talk to people, whatever it is, right? So you wanna talk about race, how to be an anti-racist, all these books that have gotten very popular. Everybody suddenly feels like they're aware, and yet they're asking people to share their personal stories so they can be inspired to make change. And then they come to their classroom and they give a test. They come to their classroom and they tell students they have to turn their cameras on or else they'll lose points. They'll say students can't be late anymore because they have no excuse. They police their students in their classrooms, teachers, and then they go to these racial equity trainings, these anti-racism liberation institutes, hear these stories and are inspired and come back and do racist things. Anti-racism means actually breaking down the racist colonized beliefs within yourself and doing that personal work. And recognizing that when somebody says that was racist, it's not about you, it's about your behavior. And if you choose to not change that behavior, then yes, you are a racist or you're perpetuating racism. But if you see that and you correct it and then continue to grow, then it was about the behavior and not you. And that's critical for educators because they have this idea that just because I'm a teacher, I know more than my students. And given that majority of our educators are white women, we know how untrue that really is.
That's brilliantly said.
Yeah. We're talking with Garfield High School teacher Shraddha Shirude and recent high school graduate Lila Shroff. And we have a few minutes left. If you've got questions about education, what it's like teaching, learning during a pandemic, anti-racist education, which we will be talking about more shortly, drop a comment below wherever you're watching this, or text the word OK to 206-926-9955. You can also tweet us at KUOW Engage. Okay, so Shraddha, you said earlier that the education system is functioning exactly as it's designed. It's not about this being a broken system that we have to fix necessarily. Are we in a moment right now where we are going to be able to build a new system from the ground up? This is the one sort of, I don't know if it's hopeful, I don't know if it's diluted, but it's the thing I keep hearing about the pandemic, which is like, this is the moment. It's the great pause. I don't know if I buy that or not, but I am wondering, I'm wondering what you think about that as it pertains to education.
I will always say this, it's not a moment, it's a movement. However, I'm not sure what white folks are waiting for. I don't know what it is about, there's always something to slow down, to wait, not right now. It is always a good idea to slow down, but 400 years is too slow. Today is the date. This is when the change needs to happen. Get rid of this system. There's countries around the world who are like, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're going to take a year off. That's what's going to happen. We're going to take a year off. That does not mean that education won't happen. We're behind. Behind from what? This arbitrary line that we have created that we're like, this is where students should be. How many times have we reevaluated education and reformed it and set new standards? Like, how many different standardized tests have we had that all had different standards? Who's setting them? Nobody. What is giving College Board? Are they some kind of like brilliant geniuses who are just like somehow inspired? Though everybody hates College Board. The student hates College Board. The colleges hate College Board. Like K-12 education hates College Board. Who are these people? Screw AP. I'm just saying. Now is the moment. Yesterday was the moment.
Lila, what do you think? You were nodding during a lot of what Shraddha was saying.
If any high school student in a
Pile
room
on.
will say it. College board. But there's two really interesting things. The first is that the way I've seen my peers approach learning in the past half year, it's really different. You know, you went on Instagram a year ago and it was who's living the most aesthetically pleasing life, and at least today in my social media ecosystem, and that might be different from the person next to me, but it's people making infographics and sharing, and I read this book and here are my takeaways, and I'm starting this college class about how communities are being affected by the pandemic, and I'm going to give you bullet points after every class, and so many amazing things. So people are embracing learning differently. They're enrolling in online classes and teaching their friends how to do X and Y and Z. And that's the first thing that really excites me. And then the second thing is sort of related to this is I've seen my peers approaching school districts and saying, you know, we want these policies to be put in place, or we want these changes in terms of, you know, anti-racism in our education system. And the pushback is like, well, yes, that's great, but we need to deal with how we learn in a pandemic, and we need to focus on the virtual classroom. And it's not A or B, this or that. It's like, no, this is all together, right? Like you can do both. We don't need to say no to this because we're doing this. Because if we're saying no to this now, you know, what's going to be different a year from now or 2 years from now, where all of a sudden we're going to be like, yes, let's do it. And I think if so much is changing already, why not embrace this change and stop using the, like, you know, legal whatever, we can't do that right now, we have to focus on other things. And so much of it, there's so much student energy that there's no reason it can't be student led. Why don't you give an hour or this class period to have, you know, students lead, and you know, so there's so much cool stuff that could be done. I'm excited for it if it all comes to fruition.
I'm just excited about listening to the two of you talk about what this could be. It's the first time I haven't felt panic in my gut. I'm just going to be really honest.
Well, and I'm just going to say, I'm sure we've got a lot of parents listening. And so this one goes out to all of you parents. Your child is not behind. Your child will never be behind, because you won't let that happen and they won't let that happen. Children are not behind anything because they know what they need, and they make sure since day one that they get what they need. And anybody who is a parent understands exactly what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. So never fear, even if we're not going to, but even if we were to cancel school, you don't need to worry about it, because your child is going to get exactly what they need.
That is definitely incredibly comforting. My child and Jeannie's child is just a couple of years apart. So, and they're in elementary school, and both of us have been feeling that kind of panic. This is definitely comforting. I want to go to, you know, with the few minutes that we have left, I'm sure a lot of people there are going, like, you know, wanting some tactics, some advice about like what to do. You know, I mean, school starts next week. So I'd love for both of you to kind of just to give, you know, for Lila to give like advice about, you know, for a student coming back, what is the best thing that you would tell them? And Shraddha, like, what would you say to parents? I mean, you've said some brilliant things there too, but I'd like to know if there's anything tactical that they can do to kind of navigate through online learning for God knows how long.
Yeah.
I think my most basic sort of advice to other students is sort of a lot of, you know, maybe this is what you heard for going to work on Zoom or whatever it is, but I think letting yourself wake up and get dressed and not be, you know, sitting in your bed half asleep on your phone, like if you're trying to do math class like that, of course it's going to be difficult, and of course it's going to be hard to be engaged and interact with your peers. But getting up, getting ready like it's a real school day, and really starting your day. And then I also would say, I think a lot of students have been sort of more passively involved online, whereas in the classroom they might be raising their hands and discussing. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, maybe it's sort of intimidating to, you know, share something out when you have 30 rectangles staring back at you. Or there's so many reasons, but I think when students are engaged and active, other students, I said this before, other students are more active and engaged, and it makes such a difference. And you go into a Zoom breakout room, and if nobody talks, it's the worst, awkwardest thing. You're sitting there and you're like, what am I doing for the next like 7 minutes? I'm doing absolutely nothing. This is so bad. But as soon as the first student talks, then the second student talks, and the third student talks, and you're having a great discussion, and you don't want to go back when your Zoom room automatically transports you back to the classroom. So I think students need to, if they embrace the virtual format and aren't afraid of it, I think it's just everybody lifts each other up.
Awesome.
Love that. Yeah. Shraddha, what do you think?
Yeah.
Do you have any tactics or suggestions for parents in navigating these uncharted waters?
You know, I'm gonna say you finally get that opportunity that every parent asks for, and that is, what did you do in school today? And now they will have an answer, and you will also have an answer. And I know you all work all day long, and you know, bless you all for what you're attempting to do here. I don't have my own personal children, so I don't live that experience. But you finally have the opportunity to engage with your child and protect them. And I don't mean protect them like keep them from whatever X, Y, and Z. I mean protect them as in when they start to fall apart and feel like they don't know anything. The best thing a parent can do is, well, tell me one thing that that your teacher said today. And if the child can even just repeat that, and you say, I didn't know that, and encourage them that no matter what they're learning, and recognize that you are learning from them. And suddenly that community engagement that's been missing from education is there. We have this huge opportunity to not be separated from our children's education, and for educators to not be separated from the children's life. We get to become partners, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like linked partners, in that we cannot work without one another. And so I think that's a brilliant opportunity that, as hard as it is, it's going to change the world, because finally we can put families first, like we've always claimed to. It's not, it won't be about the system. It's going to be about the people.
So I think we have time for one more question here. We're going to end on a fun note. This is something that we kind of ask our guests before we end the show. One thing that has really made you laugh this past week. Let's start with you, Lila.
So I'm in my quarantine room here, and when I get 3 times a day, I'm allowed to open the door to get my food from the hallway. And, this is a really quick little thing. I have about like 10 seconds. I open my door, I bring my food, I bring my door. But on the bus over here, I made friends with a girl who's also a college age student, and she ended up in the room next to me on the 17th floor. And when we plan it out, we text each other, we're like, okay, open the door. We open the door, and we see each other, and we wave, and it's the most ridiculous thing. We took a video. We look so silly. And then we end up back in our room, and it's just given me joy to have that tiny little bit of human interaction.
Oh, that's so great.
Love it. Shraddha, what about you? One thing that made you laugh this week.
Oh gosh, one thing that made me laugh, just I don't remember if I already told this story during this, but this is the most recent thing, and also just the most hilarious thing. But it's the WAP story. I don't remember if I mentioned it before we started or not.
I think it was before we went on air. So
maybe, yeah.
So our listeners would be hearing it for the first time.
So are we talking about the Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion song?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wanted to be clear. Okay.
It was during our staff meeting, and a teacher was just got up. I love this teacher, and she's on our building leadership team, and she was like, all right, we're going to be doing a TikTok today. And so everybody get up, and it's going to be the WAP. And then everybody started putting in like Cardi B, like memes and jokes. It was such a wholesome moment that I was like, I love my staff. And we have a lot of really young teachers. And by young, I mean like younger than 50. So whatever you want to call young. But we have a bunch of
Thank you for
millennial
calling
teachers.
that young.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was really funny.
Oh, that's
Jeannie,
amazing.
how about you? Something made you laugh.
Okay, so this morning I was on a work Zoom call, of course, and I said I was talking with someone about something that, you know, needs to get done. And so I said, okay, I'll make sure to put a bug in so-and-so's ear about that. And my 8-year-old was standing right here and she went, and looked at me with abject horror. And I was like, no, not literally. I'm not literally putting a bug in anybody's ear. So yeah, that's what made me laugh today.
Nice. What's been making me laugh continually is something that I discovered this week. I like TikTok. I think it's hilarious, but I discovered Arab TikTok. And ooh, it soothes the soul. Let me tell you, it is just gorgeous and tons of jokes that not a whole lot of people would understand, but obviously I would. So anytime I'm feeling down, and there's been quite a few moments of that this week, it's like, all right, let's go to Arab TikTok and let's soothe the soul.
Wow.
That's my thing.
Okay. So, all right, Zeki, I am a fan of your ongoing relationship with TikTok. We've been talking about this for months now, so I'm just going to go on record saying that. But also, I am a huge fan of our guests who I would spend another hour with if we could. Shraddha Shirude is a math teacher at Garfield High School, and Lila Shroff is a recent graduate from Mercer Island High School, taking a gap year in South Korea, currently in quarantine in a hotel room there. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been great talking with both of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much. And as a quick reminder, we are looking to hear from middle and high school students with some personal stories that illustrate what it's like to start a new year remotely and how does it feel, you know, to be done with summer break or any kind of obstacles that you're facing. We just want to hear from students right now. So Joshua McNichols is the reporter who's reporting on that. We're going to have his contact info in the comments, so you could email him if you'd like to kind of participate. All right, so I think this is our show. Our producer is Zaytun Ahmed. Our events team is Charlotte Duran and Bridget Anderson. Our graphics design lead is Tia Popescu, and marketing manager is Michaela Giannotti. Our social media strategist is Juan Pablo Chiquiza. From all of us at KUOW, just want to say, please be kind to each other and have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.